All right, I just went on a walk and it is so windy outside right now. The visibility is, it's like a brownout. I've heard that term. Just wild, just really, really wild weather. And the wind is, it's just interesting. Nature provides so many analogies and allegories. And I just remembered a time I used to have a motorcycle. And you're more vulnerable, you're more exposed on a motorcycle. Obviously, even with all the gear on, and I always had, all the protective gear, but it's a much more, in a sense, intimate experience because you're more connected with the elements, you're more connected with nature, you're feeling, if it's wind or even if it's not windy because of your speed relative to the air, you're feeling air moving past you. And but you have a very, what am I trying to say here? You get very familiar as you go. There's just such a kind of subtlety, this kind of sweet communion. I'm trying to think of the right word here. Okay, it's not quite coming to me, but there's this sort of dance. You get more. There's like this exquisite sensitivity. Is almost you have a much greater, your body position, how you're using the clutch, how you're using the brakes, how you're using the throttle, just slight shifts of your body weight. It's like a dance kind of. It's like this more interactive, intimate way to move down the road. And you get very more attuned to kind of the subtle shifts in the road. For one, you're kind of on a higher alert because you are more vulnerable, so you're looking out around you, your periphery, especially if you're in a city or something. But the wind is a very interesting element to experience, confront, to ultimately to work with, play with, dance with, move with. When you're on a motorcycle, because you could be going, you might have a tailwind, just sort of to some extent not that big of a deal, sort of a non-factor. You're just kind of getting buoyed along, pushed along. You might not even really experience it to any significant degree. Headwind, there's things you can do to be kind of more streamlined as you go. Depends on your windshield, things like that. But that isn't the biggest obstacle to confront. But anytime you have like a wind cutting perpendicular or at an angle to you, that there's like an art, I guess is a way to put it. There's like a subtle art to it that is really kind of exquisite, and there's a way that you can manipulate the throttle and move with it's like when a wind is coming, you can kind of ease off of the throttle a little bit. There's a way you can be in your body where you are alert, you're stable, you're steady, but you're also loose. It's like like a reed bending with the wind, something like that, where a wind hits and you're kind of in this delicate interplay with the throttle. The wind hits, kind of knocking you to the side. You can kind of ease off the throttle, allow your body to kind of bend with it. Again, you're not rigid, because that that can be disastrous. And you're not just completely like unstable, totally loose, but there's this kind of balance point of, it's weird, it's it's dynamic, but it's a very stable place, because you're just in total harmony, in a sense. You're in like this harmonious state with all the surrounding conditions. So wind hits, you maybe let off your gas. You start to feel when you can gas, when you can use the throttle, when you need to ease off. You let your body move, you let your bike kind of move a little bit, but because you're sort of in this dynamic balance point, yeah, and then there's wind condition, and it's depends on the topography that you're moving through, because a hill can kind of block a wind, or it might channel the wind in a different way. You might get into these kind of cross currents. And so there's this, it takes some experience, but you learn to bend, you learn to move, you learn to lean into, lean away from. And it's this, yeah, there's something kind of exhilarating, thrilling about it. It's like you're not insisting on it being a certain way, being rigid, and I'm going to get from A to B. It's like, no, you've got these conditions. You've got this wind coming at you, maybe from multiple directions, maybe changing directions, again, depending on what kind of terrain you're moving through. Another thing is, if you get in all these kind of air wakes, like you have a wake in the water, if you're passing a boat or behind the boat, there's a similar thing that's happening with like a semi-truck, a big vehicle, a semi-truck. It's like there's this wind break, especially if you're running parallel, or it's multiple lanes, and you've got a semi that comes. Say you've got a wind that's cutting across, and you've got a semi that comes. All of a sudden that wind drops, and so you can almost feel like you're getting sucked in, because you were naturally kind of counterbalancing in this dynamic dance with the wind, and then all of a sudden that stops with the windbreak of the truck, and so then you got to reorient, you got to shift there. Then once the truck moves past, and you kind of hit the wake of the air of the semi, and so there's all these like micro adjustments and this kind of subtle art to it. Yeah, so it's like, it's not a total insistence on, this is how I ride, this is how I'm gonna get from point A to point B. No, you are confronted with these conditions in life. Here's where you can kind of allegorize and generalize, but it's like you're confronted with the storms of life, the wind. And that doesn't also mean that you have to stop, typically. I mean, depends on how extreme the weather is. I've had some of those experiences too, but if you respect the conditions and you're attentive to them and attuned to them, it's like the wind is asking, you could almost think of it as the wind is asking you to move a certain way. It's like it's requiring a certain kind of movement, and it's not prohibitive of forward movement, but you have to learn how to, slow down when it's blowing hard and lean into it. You have this kind of dynamic, stable relaxation, this alert relaxation, this but if you have that going, you can make forward progress. You have to take into account the totality of the environment. It's that word gestalt, gestalt, the gestalt of the environment, all of the various factors. You have to take those into account. If you're too rigid, that's going to lead to disaster. If you just stop completely, then you make no forward progress. So I remember once I was in these conditions that it was just like, the phrase that came to mind for me was, it was a homicidal wind. It was like this wind that was just, strongest, stiffest crosswind I'd ever been in. I was in this wide open desert terrain and just knocked me multiple times, actually, because I hadn't really worked, I guess I really hadn't worked all of this out. Maybe this was part of the learning process. I can't remember the sequence of all these things chronologically, but I was going, and I am generally a pretty skilled rider, but I had like saddlebags and I think a backpack on. So it wasn't just like rider and bike. I think I had a bunch of like equipment with me, but I was going, and the wind would just hit, and I went flying off of the bike. Bike toppled, and I literally just went like tumbling with the wind. My body like tumbling not end over end, but rolling for, I don't know, 20 meters or something. And you could like lean into this wind and it would support you, and you could jump and it would like, you'd kind of fly back a little bit. And so I did feel completely halted. It was and you're just wide open, exposed, and you don't want your bike to keep getting toppled over lest something bad happen. You break brake lever, clutch lever, what's the term for that? Lever. Anyways, or the throttle gets messed up or whatever, the more times you lay your bike over, the higher the likelihood of damage. So, but I kept with it, and even in that really, really extreme situation, because I knew I was quite a ways out before I would reach town or, civilization, so to speak. I was just out in the middle of nowhere. Even at that, like, really intense, I found a way to going very slowly and just it was like, had to be very moment by moment, paying attention to the currents of the wind, just using these just little micro adjustments of the throttle, going slowly, bending with the wind. I was eventually able to move out of it. I didn't have to just stop and wait there. So it's like you surrender to life. You surrender to what is. You surrender to the conditions, the storms, and you work within that. And I was surprised even in that one, and maybe I'm misremembering it and embellishing. I don't think so though. But that I was able to make progress. It was just a matter of, I had to go very slow. I had to go at the pace that was being dictated to me. You know what I mean? So I had to, it's like you have to respect nature. But even then, in that really extreme circumstance, there was an opening. It was a very small opening. But I was still able to make progress and save some time and not just be stuck out in those conditions. It was a longer story, actually. It was quite an interesting day, how that whole thing wrapped up. But so yeah, I was thinking about all of that just now as I was walking outside in the wind. And you realize this little things too, like how grateful I am for eyelashes. Because as I was walking, and it was just like this, it's a weird thing. It's like when you don't have a preference of how, like there was no where I needed to be right now. I just wanted to go out and walk. I used to really hate the wind because of allergies in part. I think just because other people around me hated the wind, so I sort of picked it up. I also have always had, various kind of body dysmorphic types of things and insecurities, especially with my hair. And, the wind, it's like when you're trying to have your hair look a certain way so you don't have your hairline, you don't want to expose your hairline, or your hair's too thin in the front or something. It's like you can do all these things to kind of cover and mask your hair. And I still do it to some extent. It's lessened over time, and so the wind was just enemy number one, because it's like it's blowing my cover. I've got things arranged just the way I want it to present a certain image. And so the wind was stressful, but it's interesting when you don't have an agenda when you walk in the wind. And you can just kind of purely experience it as just this force of nature. And there's something kind of thrilling about it because it's just energy. It's just energy. And so the wind is slowing me down. Great. Let me just experience that. There's nothing inside me saying it has to be some other way. Maybe this is exactly the perfect thing, is for me to slow down right here and to feel this. And you can even kind of play with it and jump into it and lean into it. You know what I mean? It just opens up other possibilities of appreciating. Yeah, and I was thinking as I was walking, it was like, this probably looks like the last thing somebody would want to do, is like some cars are passing me, because it's just so intense and there's just dust and you see like downed tree branches, and it's pretty strong wind. But just in my direct first person direct experiences, like, is anything really the matter here? I've got enough covering as far as clothes, so my body feels warm and I'm not getting like sand blasted. You do have to keep your eyes kind of down. But I was realizing just how nice it is to have eyelashes that are kind of filtering the sand, so my eyes aren't getting blasted. And it's like, how much in this moment walking, how big of a visual field do I really need? And the answer was, I didn't really need much. I just needed to see where the next step was. Sometimes that's all you need in life, is just, I don't need to know the whole trajectory. I don't need to see the whole road ahead of me. But I just needed to see, that little window of the visual field, that next step in front of me. And it was like, it was no problem. It was just kind of, now there was a little bit of paranoia about looking at the dry tree branches overhead and things like that, but even that, not so much, because you'd probably hear a cracking, and the chances of it breaking right when you're under it are really slim, so. Yeah, it's just interesting how much your own kind of neurotic hang-ups, or your own filter, desires, ambitions, it's like you can experience the wind in a state of great anxiety, and it's like, fuck this wind is awful. Or you can just experience the wind as just, it's like, I don't know that it should be any other way right now. This is just what reality is right now. So, and the mediating factor, the differentiating factor is the kind of, you could say, the mind or the story, or, because because I'm not so attached to things, certain outcomes, looking a certain way with my hair or getting a certain place. Thank goodness the allergies are not as bad. Knock on wood. Yeah, I mean, and it's, yeah. And sometimes it is just a pain in the ass because you have, it messes up your property, or you're trying to get somewhere and it's causing, and I mean, severe weather can obviously have very significant impacts, in terms of material damage and road accidents, car crashes, or whatever. So, it's all just situational, but I don't know, it's yeah. How you relate to the wind, to the storms of life, how you relate to the conditions of your world, of your universe, makes a big difference. Moving with versus moving against. I saw some beautiful birds. I was thinking about that too, like, well, yeah, anyways, I don't know if I want to get into that. But yeah, birds, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to get into that. Adios.